My name is Rachel Bennett. I am 22 years old. For 4 years, I paid my own way through college, working two jobs while sending money home to a family that never once asked how I was doing. On the most important day of my life, the day I walked across that stage as the top graduate in my entire university, the day I was announced as the recipient of a $12 million research fellowship, my parents weren't there. They were at my sister's prom send-off party instead. But what happened 8 months later, when they found out exactly what I had built without them, when they showed up at my apartment door asking for help, is something I will never forget for the rest of my life. I thought the story ended at graduation. I was wrong. I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, in a small brick house on Maple Crest Drive with my parents, Diane and Robert Bennett, and my younger sister, Madison. From the time I was 9 years old, I understood something that most kids never have to learn. In my family, love wasn't unconditional. It was conditional on usefulness. I was useful. Madison was adored. I don't say that with bitterness now. I say it because it's simply what happened, and it shaped every decision I made for the next 13 years. My mother worked part-time at a dental office. My father installed HVAC systems for a contracting company. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either, and money was always the quiet tension humming underneath every conversation in our house. Madison was born when I was 4. From the moment she arrived, something in our house shifted. She was the baby everyone wanted to hold, the toddler everyone wanted to photograph, the little girl whose tantrums were just her personality, while my quiet, careful behavior was simply expected and never praised. By the time I was 11, I was making my own lunches, ironing my own school clothes, and walking myself to school because my parents were busy getting Madison ready for dance class. By 13, I was babysitting Madison most weeknights while my parents worked late, or, more often, while my mother took Madison to pageant rehearsals. I didn't resent her for being young. I resented the silence that followed every time I did something well. When I was 14, I won the regional spelling bee for our school district. I remember running home with the little gold trophy, certain that this would be the moment my parents finally looked at me the way they looked at Madison. My mother glanced at the trophy, said, "That's nice, honey," and immediately turned back to helping Madison glue sequins onto a poster board for a school project. I put the trophy in my closet. I never brought home another award to show them again. I just kept winning them quietly, for myself. By high school, I had perfected the art of taking care of myself. I got my first job at 16, working the register at a grocery store on weekends. I didn't need the money for clothes or fun. I needed it because I'd learned by then that if I wanted anything, including basic things like a winter coat that fit or a calculator for AP calculus, I needed to buy it myself. Meanwhile, Madison, 2 years younger, never had a job in high school. My parents paid for her cheerleading uniforms, her competition fees, her car when she turned 16. A black Honda Civic, paid in full, no payments required. I bought my first car at 18 with babysitting and grocery store money. A 2008 Toyota Corolla with 140,000 miles on it. I was proud of that car. It was mine. I want to be clear about something, because this part matters. My parents were not cruel people in any obvious way. They never screamed at me. They never hit me. If you met them at a barbecue, you would think they were perfectly nice, normal parents. That's what made it so hard to explain to anyone outside the family. The unfairness wasn't loud. It was quiet, constant, and everywhere, like a draft you can never quite locate the source of. When I got accepted into Ohio State's engineering program with a partial academic scholarship, my mother's response was, "That's so far from home. Who's going to help with Madison's homecoming dress fittings?" That was the moment, more than any other, that told me exactly where I stood. I went anyway. College is where the real sacrifices started, and this is the part of the story where I need to be specific, because the numbers matter. My partial scholarship covered about 40% of tuition. The rest, tuition, housing, books, food, was on me. I worked 25 hours a week at a campus coffee shop during the school year and full-time, 60 hours a week, every single summer at a manufacturing plant back home that hired seasonal labor. By sophomore year, I was also doing something I never told anyone at school about. I was sending money home. It started small. My father's truck broke down in October of my sophomore year, and he called me, not asking, but saying, in that particular tone he used, "Your mother's worried sick about how we're going to get to work." I sent $600 from my coffee shop savings. I didn't have $600 to spare. I ate ramen for 3 weeks afterward. By junior year, it had become a pattern. Madison needed money for her junior prom dress. $340. My parents needed help with a property tax bill. $1,200. Madison's car needed new tires. $580. Every time, the ask came wrapped in guilt. "We did so much for you growing up. You're the responsible one. We know you'll understand. Your sister doesn't have a job like you. You know that." I started keeping a notebook, not out of suspicion at first, just out of habit, the same instinct that made me track every dollar of my own budget since I was 16. I wrote down every transfer I sent home. By the end of my junior year, the notebook showed $9,400 sent home over 2 years. I was also working as a research assistant for a materials science professor starting in my sophomore year, unpaid at first, then for a small stipend. I loved the work. It was the only part of my life that felt entirely mine, untouched by guilt or obligation. My professor, Dr. Elaine Whitfield, became the first adult in my life who looked at my work and said, simply, "This is good. Keep going." By senior year, my total sent home had reached $14,800. That number still sits in my chest like a stone sometimes. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. 4 years of choosing my family's comfort over my own, while never once being asked how I was doing, whether I was eating enough, whether I was sleeping, whether college was hard. Nobody ever asked. What happened next, I did not see coming. I wish I could say I had some kind of intuition that things were about to change. I didn't. I just kept working, kept sending money, kept believing that eventually the scale would balance itself out. I met Daniel Cho in the fall of my junior year in a thermodynamics study group that met twice a week in the engineering library. Daniel was quiet in the way that comes from confidence, not shyness. He noticed things. About 3 months into knowing him, after I'd mentioned in passing that I needed to send something home before I could go to dinner, he asked the question that nobody in my life had ever asked me before. "Why do you keep doing that?" I remember being almost offended by the question, like it was an attack on my family instead of a genuine question. I gave him the answer I'd given myself for years. "They're my family. That's just what you do." Daniel didn't argue. He just said, "Does it ever go the other way?" I didn't have an answer for that. I changed the subject. But the question didn't leave me. It sat there, quietly, the way a splinter sits under skin you've stopped noticing, until suddenly you press on it and realize it's still there, still capable of hurting. Over the following year, Daniel became the steadiest person in my life. He never told me what to do about my family. He just kept asking small, careful questions that made me look at things I'd trained myself not to look at directly. "Did they call you on your birthday this year? Did your mom ask about your research project? When's the last time anyone in your family asked how you were doing, not what you could do for them?" I started noticing the pattern myself, once someone else had pointed a light at it. My 21st birthday came and went with a single group text from my mother. "Happy B-Day, hun. Hope you're having fun." No call. Meanwhile, 3 weeks earlier, Madison's 20th birthday had involved a full family dinner, a cake, and a Facebook album with 34 photos. I wasn't angry yet. I was just starting to see clearly for the first time. I wish I could say the next part happened dramatically, but the truth is, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday in February of my senior year, while I was doing something completely unrelated. Helping my mother set up online banking on her new phone over a video call because she'd asked me to walk her through it. While guiding her through the app, her screen briefly showed her account summary, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. A recurring transfer, $310 a month, labeled Madison, apt help. I didn't say anything in the moment. I just made a mental note and told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a leftover label from years ago. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Madison had moved into her own apartment the previous fall after graduating high school and deciding college wasn't for her right now. She'd taken a job at a nail salon, part-time, by choice. I did the math. $310 a month for at least 5 months that I could account for from the timestamp range I'd briefly seen. That was $1,550 just in the months I happened to glimpse. 2 weeks later, I was home for a long weekend, and I found myself, almost without deciding to, looking through an old shared family laptop that still had my mother's email logged in. Something she'd never bothered to log out of. A habit from when I used to help her with bill payments years earlier. I found a folder of bank statements going back 2 years. The recurring transfer to Madison wasn't new. It had started the same month Madison moved into her apartment. The same month, I realized with a slow, cold understanding that I had wired my parents $1,200 for a family emergency they described as urgent and dire. There had been no emergency. There had been Madison's first month's rent and deposit, money my parents covered using a sob story aimed directly at me. I kept reading. I found a string of text messages between my mother and Madison, visible because the laptop had the family group chat open in a browser tab. In them, Madison was asking for new furniture money. My mother responded, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out. We always do. Rachel will understand. She's good with money." I read that message probably 11 times. Rachel will understand. She's good with money. Not Rachel works incredibly hard. Not Rachel sacrifices a lot. Just Rachel is a resource, predictable, reliable, endlessly available. I took screenshots of everything, not because I had a plan yet, but because some instinct in me, the same instinct that had kept that notebook since sophomore year, told me I needed proof, because someday, somehow, I would need to show this to someone, maybe even just to myself, to confirm that what I'd lived through had actually happened the way I remembered it. I closed the laptop and went back to my dorm room 2 days early, telling my parents I had a project deadline. I didn't have a project deadline. I just couldn't sit in that house anymore. I thought that discovery was the worst part. I was wrong. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. This is something I want to explain clearly, because I think it's the part of my story people understand the least. I didn't stop helping my family because of one dramatic fight. I stopped because I finally had proof of something I'd felt for 13 years, and proof changes things in a way that suspicion never can. Over the following 3 months, quietly, without announcement, I made a series of small decisions. I stopped answering emergency calls from my parents with immediate money. The next time my mother called asking for $400 for a car repair, I said I was tight on cash that month, which was true, since I'd finally started keeping more of my own paycheck. She seemed surprised, almost offended, but didn't push. I redirected the $150 a month I'd been automatically transferring to my parents for groceries, a standing arrangement since sophomore year, into a separate savings account I opened under only my name. I stopped picking up calls from Madison asking for advice on things like budgeting, things she'd never actually apply, because I'd realized over time that those calls weren't really about advice. They were about having someone else carry the mental weight of her decisions while she kept making the same ones. Nobody noticed at first. That's the strange thing about being the responsible one in a family like mine. Your absence doesn't register as absence. It registers as inconvenience, something to complain about, not something to investigate the cause of. I kept working with Dr. Whitfield on our research project, a materials engineering study on heat-resistant polymer composites with potential aerospace applications. By spring of senior year, our paper had been accepted for presentation at a national engineering symposium. I didn't tell my family. I'd stopped expecting them to care, so I'd stopped giving them the chance to disappoint me. In April, 3 weeks before graduation, I received an email that I read 4 times before I believed it was real. I had been selected, alongside 2 other recipients nationally, for the Whitmore Hale Aerospace Innovation Fellowship. A research fellowship funding my proposed graduate work on next-generation thermal shielding materials, with an associated grant and lab funding package totaling $12 million over 5 years to be administered through a joint university-industry research partnership. I sat in my dorm room and cried for the first time in longer than I could remember. I called my parents that same evening to tell them. My mother's response was, "That's wonderful, honey. Hey, so, quick thing. Madison's prom send-off is the same weekend as your graduation. Did you know that? We were thinking, since you've probably got friends there for your ceremony, maybe you wouldn't mind if we came to the send-off instead? It's her last one, since she's not doing the senior thing again." I remember the silence that followed my own voice asking, carefully, "Wait, you're not coming to my graduation?" "We'll see the recording, sweetie. You understand?" This is a big moment for Madison, too. I did not understand. But I said I did, because that's what 22 years of training had taught me to say. I thought that phone call was the breaking point. I was wrong. The breaking point was still 3 weeks away. Graduation was held on a bright, unusually warm Saturday morning in early June in the university's main arena, packed with nearly 6,000 people. Daniel was there, sitting in the third row with Dr. Whitfield, who had specifically requested a seat near the stage because, as she put it, "I want to see this properly." My roommate Priya was there. My coffee shop manager, Mr. Holleran, who had given me flexible shifts for 4 years without ever once asking why I needed them, drove 2 hours to attend. My parents and Madison were 40 miles away, at a hotel banquet hall, taking photos of Madison in a sequined dress before her prom send-off party. When my name was called, Rachel Bennett, summa cum laude, recipient of the Whitmore Hale Aerospace Innovation Fellowship. The entire graduating engineering cohort stood and applauded because the fellowship had been announced to the department weeks earlier, and everyone there understood what $12 million in research funding meant for someone 22 years old. I looked out at the crowd, scanning instinctively for 2 empty seats that I already knew would be empty. I found Daniel's face instead. He was standing, clapping, and even from that distance I could see he was openly crying, unashamed, the way only people who genuinely love you cry at things that matter to you. I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand, and in that single moment, something inside me that had been bent for 13 years finally, quietly, snapped straight. I wasn't angry in that moment. I want to be honest about that. I was something colder and clearer than angry. I was done. What happened next changed everything. Part 8. Don't make this about you. I drove to my apartment after the ceremony. Daniel, Priya, Dr. Whitfield, and Mr. Holleran took me to dinner to celebrate, and I checked my phone for the first time in hours. There was a single text from my mother, sent at 2:47 p.m. during my actual ceremony. "Hope it went well! Madison looks so beautiful today. Wait till you see the pics. Group chat has them." I opened the family group chat. 41 photos of Madison in her prom dress, captioned with hearts and exclamation points from my mother, my father, 2 aunts, and my grandmother. Comments like "stunning," "future homecoming queen energy," "she's glowing." Not one message in that chat mentioned my graduation. Not one asked how the ceremony went. Not one acknowledged the $12 million. I didn't respond. I put my phone down and went to dinner, and for the first time in years, I let myself actually enjoy a celebration without performing gratitude toward people who weren't even there to receive it. 2 days later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did, because what she said in that call became the moment I would replay for the rest of my life. "So I saw on Facebook the school posted about your scholarship thing," she said. 12 million? That seems like a typo, right? That's for the whole program, not just you? I explained, calmly, that the figure was the research grant and fellowship funding attached to my position, administered through the university for my graduate research over 5 years. Not a personal check, but yes, that was the real figure associated with the fellowship. There was a pause. Then, wow. Okay. Well, listen, I know this isn't the best timing, but your father's hours got cut at the contracting company, and with Madison's deposit for her fall semester at the community college coming up, we were wondering if you could help out, since you're clearly doing so well now. I felt something rise in my throat, not tears, something closer to disbelief. Mom, I said carefully, you didn't come to my graduation. Don't make this about you, Rachel, she said, her voice sharpening instantly. We had Madison's send-off. You knew that. That's just bad timing. It's not a personal thing. We'll see the next one. Don't be dramatic about it. The next one. As if I would have another college graduation. As if a 13-year pattern was simply bad timing. That's your job, she added, when I hesitated to answer about the money. You're the one who's good with this stuff. That's just how it's always been. 4 words. That's just how it's always been. That was the line. That was the dagger. I told her I needed to think about it, and I hung up. I had no idea what they were hiding underneath that request. I thought I already knew the worst of it. I didn't. Part 9. What the records showed. That night, I sat down with Daniel and finally told him everything. The screenshots from February, the old laptop, the recurring transfer to Madison's apartment, the pattern stretching back years. I'd been carrying it alone for 4 months. You should actually add it all up, Daniel said. Not the feeling, the actual number. So I did. I spent that weekend going through my own bank statements, old Venmo records, the notebook I'd kept since sophomore year, and the screenshots from the family laptop. The total, across 4 years of college, of money sent home in emergencies, rent help, car repairs, grocery contributions, Madison's prom dress, Madison's competition fees, Madison's apartment deposit, and 5 months of rent assistance my parents had quietly funded using money guilted out of me under false pretenses, $31,460. I sat with that number for a long time. $31,460, earned through 25-hour work weeks and 60-hour summers, while I ate ramen and drove a 14-year-old Corolla with a check engine light I never had the money to diagnose. And on the one day that money and sacrifice should have meant nothing compared to who showed up, they hadn't shown up. I made a decision that weekend, calmly, without rage, the same way I'd made every other decision in my life, methodically. I was not going to send another dollar home. I was not going to explain myself loudly or dramatically. I was simply going to stop and let the silence speak for itself, the same silence they'd given me for 13 years. I blocked the recurring emergency pattern by simply telling my parents, the next time they called asking for help, that I had moved my finances toward my own savings goals for graduate housing, and I would not be able to help going forward. My mother's response was, "Wow, okay, I guess we know where we stand with you now." I almost laughed. "I guess we know where we stand with you now," said by the woman who had skipped my graduation that same month. I didn't respond to that text. I let it sit, unanswered, for the first time in my life. I want to be clear about something. I did not block my family. I did not disappear. I simply stopped funding them and stopped absorbing their guilt. The calls started within 3 weeks. My father called first, in early July, his voice carefully casual. "Hey, kiddo, just checking in. Heard congratulations are in order. By the way, that's a big deal." It was the first time either parent had directly acknowledged the fellowship to my face. It came 45 days after the ceremony, and only after the money stopped flowing in the other direction. I thanked him politely. He pivoted within 90 seconds to asking whether I might consider maybe just helping with 1 more semester for your sister, since things are tight. I told him I couldn't. My mother's calls grew more frequent through July and August, sometimes warm, reminiscing about my childhood in a way that felt suspiciously timed, sometimes sharp, accusing me of changing since I'd started my fellowship, as if becoming financially stable was a character flaw. Madison texted me directly in early August for the first time in nearly a year, not to congratulate me, but to ask, "Can you talk to Mom and Dad about helping me with my car payment? They said you're the one in charge of money stuff now. I'm the one in charge of money stuff now." As if I had been promoted into a position I had never applied for and had, in fact, just resigned from. I didn't respond to Madison's text for 3 days. When I did, I wrote a single sentence. I'm not in charge of anyone's money but my own. You should talk to Mom and Dad directly about your own bills." She never responded. By September, my parents had missed a mortgage payment for the first time in 11 years. I learned this not from them, but from my grandmother, my father's mother, who called me directly, worried, asking if I knew anything about trouble at the house. I told my grandmother the truth, calmly, for the first time to anyone in the older generation, that I had been financially supporting my parents and sister for 4 years, that I had stopped after they missed my graduation for Madison's prom, and that I didn't plan to start again. My grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I had no idea it had gotten that bad. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't." By the time Thanksgiving arrived, 8 months after graduation, I had moved into a small apartment near my graduate lab, started my fellowship research under Dr. Whitfield's continued mentorship, and Daniel and I had been together for 2.5 years, steady as ever. My grandmother insisted on hosting Thanksgiving that year. Specifically, I would later learn, because she wanted everyone in the same room. I almost didn't go. Daniel encouraged me to, not because he thought I owed my family an appearance, but because, as he put it, "If you're going to close this chapter, close it with your eyes open, not by avoiding the room." So I went. I brought the folder. Not out of cruelty. I brought it because I had spent 8 months listening to my mother tell relatives, quietly, that I had changed, that I'd gotten cold since the big scholarship, that money had gone to my head. I'd heard this secondhand from my grandmother, from an aunt, from a cousin who'd asked me directly over text if I was doing okay because she'd heard I'd cut off the family. I was tired of being cast as the villain in a story I had financed. Dinner started normally enough. Turkey, the usual small talk, Madison showing off a new phone my parents had bought her for her birthday, a detail I noted without comment. About 40 minutes in, my mother brought it up herself, in front of everyone, clearly hoping the audience would pressure me. "So, Rachel, your father and I were hoping, now that the holidays are here, that we could talk about getting back to how things used to be. Family helps family." I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. I had imagined, for months, what I might say in this exact moment. I had imagined yelling. I had imagined crying. In the actual moment, I felt none of that. I felt only a calm, settled clarity. "Family does help family," I said. "I agree completely." I opened the folder. I laid out, one by one, without raising my voice, the notebook records starting sophomore year. The bank transfer screenshots showing the recurring Madison, apt helpline. The text message where my mother told Madison, "Rachel will understand. She's good with money." The total, $31,460 over 4 years. And finally, the text from graduation day. 41 photos of Madison's prom dress, 0 mentions of my ceremony, 0 mentions of the fellowship, sent during the exact hours I was crossing that stage. Nobody said anything for almost 10 full seconds. My Aunt Carol broke the silence first. "Diane, is this true? You took money from Rachel to cover Madison's rent and told her it was a family emergency?" My mother's face had gone pale. "It wasn't. It wasn't like that. We were going to pay her back eventually. Things were just tight." "You missed her graduation," my grandmother said quietly. "It wasn't a question. For a prom photo session." "That's not fair," my mother said, her voice rising. "We had 2 events on the same day. We made a choice. It's not like we don't love her." "You said don't make this about you when she brought it up," I said. I kept my voice level. "That's the part I haven't been able to stop thinking about for 8 months. The day I got a $12 million research fellowship, the same day you skipped my graduation, you told me not to make it about myself." My father, who had said almost nothing the entire dinner, finally spoke. "We thought you'd understand. You always understood." "I did understand," I said. "That's the problem. I understood for 13 years. I'm done understanding." The fallout was not dramatic, and I think that's important to say clearly, because real consequences rarely are. My parents did not lose their house. They did not go bankrupt. What happened was smaller and, in some ways, more honest. They had to live within an income that no longer included $30,000 a year of quiet, guilted support from their older daughter. My father picked up overtime hours at the contracting company. My mother, for the first time in over a decade, increased her hours at the dental office to full-time. Madison, 6 months later, finally got a full-time job at a regional insurance company, not because she wanted to, my grandmother told me, but because the money had simply stopped existing. My relationship with my parents did not end. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people often expect these stories to end in total estrangement, and that's not what happened here, and I don't think it needed to. What changed was the shape of the relationship. I still talk to my parents. We have dinner together every few months. My father, in particular, has made small but real efforts. He called me on my birthday this year, the first time in 5 years he'd called instead of texting, and he asked, unprompted, how my research was actually going, and he listened to the answer. My mother has been slower to change, but even she, 18 months later, sent me a card on the anniversary of my graduation that simply said, "I'm proud of you. I should have said that sooner." I keep that card in my desk drawer at the lab. Madison and I are still rebuilding something resembling a relationship, mostly through small, low-stakes contact. She texted me last month asking about a budgeting app. Not money, an app, and I helped her set it up over video call. It's not closeness. But it's not nothing, either. What I did not do, and will not do, is return to being the family's financial safety net. The money does not flow again. That door is closed permanently, and everyone in my family now understands that clearly, because I made it clear with evidence, calmly, once, and never needed to repeat myself. I'm 23 now, 14 months into my fellowship research, working on thermal shielding composites that may eventually be used in next-generation aerospace heat exposure systems. Daniel and I got engaged in March. Dr. Whitfield still emails me research papers she thinks I'd find interesting, the same way she has since I was a sophomore with an unpaid research position and no idea what I was capable of. I think about that day in the arena often. Walking across that stage, scanning the crowd for 2 empty seats I already knew would be empty, and finding instead a small group of people who had no biological obligation to love me and who showed up anyway. I used to think family meant the people who raised you. I've learned, slowly and at real cost, that family means something closer to. The people who show up when there's nothing in it for them. My parents loved me. I believe that, even now. But love without consistent action is just a feeling, and feelings don't drive you 4 hours to a graduation ceremony, and feelings don't say congratulations on the day that actually matters. The people who love you the way you deserve do not keep a tally of what they're owed in return. They simply show up, and they keep showing up, long after the spotlight has moved somewhere else. I spent 13 years being useful before I was loved. I spent 4 years paying for a love that came with invoices I never agreed to sign. I will not spend another year doing either one again.